It is our distinct honor to invite Honorable Mr. Justice Dipak Misra, former Chief Justice of India and Distinguished Juris Professor at HNLU, to deliver the third Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture on Actualization of Dr. Ambedkar's Idea, Inclusiveness, Equality, and Affirmative Actions. Honorable Sir, may I kindly request you to grace us with your lecture.
Professor Dr. B.C. Vivekanandan, Vice Chancellor, HNLU, Dr. Dipak Srivastav, Dr. Bipin Kumar, members of the faculty, friends from the electronic and print media, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever has been told by Mr. Srivastav and the Vice Chancellor, I would request you to forget. I assume you are here to listen to me with regard to Ambedkar, isn't it? The eminent Dr. Ambedkar. Prior to that, I must tell you, I am extremely delighted to be amongst you on this Red Letter Day, the Republic Day. And I must unhesitatingly admit that it's really a great occasion to share the thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar with young intellectuals. I treat you as the jars of law because you are the student of a great university and guided by a wise Vice Chancellor and a hard-working faculty. Right? All right. Dr. Ambedkar, an eminent personality in the history of India, believed with deepest faith and fought with active concern for social justice that put human dignity, self-respect, and reclamation of human personality on the highest pedestal. A thinker who believed in democratic philosophy that encapsulated the fundamental principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. He was very keen for a just society that would include the disadvantaged, marginalized, and underprivileged categories of the society. I, as a student of law and history, consider that humanity has witnessed two illustrious and dedicated, action-oriented protagonists who had the avowed purpose to alleviate the conditions of suffering class. They are President Abraham Lincoln of United States of America and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of our Constitution. I say without any fear of contradiction, Dr. Ambedkar shall always remain relevant for any society and can never, and I mean never, be dated. Time cannot erase him. Time cannot efface him. Time cannot destroy his thoughts. That is Dr. Ambedkar's way of thinking of social justice as well as democracy. Dr. Ambedkar, as the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution of India, had effectively spearheaded social reformation in our great country. As a norm builder, he believed in the concept and actualization of social democracy. Throughout my speech, I'll be emphasizing on social democracy without getting it divorced from political democracy and economic equality. While speaking about social democracy, Ambedkar said, I quote him, "Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it social democracy." What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. His ideas on inclusion and affirmation in the context of dealing with historical oppression faced by the marginalized sections of our society has immensely influenced the shaping of the Constitution. His philosophy can be understood through his views on social, political, and economic equality, as well as his advocacy for affirmative action and the upliftment of oppressed groups. His idea of inclusion and affirmative action, I repeat, was aimed at annihilation of the age-old caste-based hierarchies, a kind of graded inequality, creating a society that should embrace diversity and provide equal opportunities. And that is how we are here. I may state here that he conceived of a social equality as the real thrust, the real fulcrum of the progressive democracy. It is discernible from the following statement. He gave it on the 26th day, and I quote him. On the 26th day of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value, unquote. That is what precisely your Vice Chancellor has been telling you, that social equality, social justice as a normative equality concept has not yet been achieved, though we have achieved quite a lot. Ambedkar was convinced that the state has a crucial role to play in the annihilation of caste system. The state was advised to actively engage through legislation and policies to eliminate discrimination and provide equal opportunities for all citizens. Affirmative action was one such measure he advocated to address historical injuries and injustices. His aim was to promote the development of a more equal and inclusive society by law, as well as, I emphasize, change of collective mindset. He strongly believed that unless there is a transformation in social attitudes, social proclivities, and relationships, true democracy would remain a mirage. According to him, social inequality corrodes self-respect, inflicts ambition, affects the fighting spirit of the social victim. He proclaimed, discrimination is another menace that must be guarded against if that fundamental rights are to be real rights. If we want the fundamental rights in chapter 3 to be recognized, to be really realized, to be actualized, to be fructified, to be engrafted in the reality, then you have to really destroy, annihilate discrimination in the truest sense of the term. That is what Dr. Ambedkar meant. He emphasized on the vital importance of political empowerment in the quest of a fair and inclusive society. His conception of reservation and affirmation action as a means of representation has significantly influenced the restructuring of India's political scene, aiming to guarantee that historically marginalized communities actively participate and influence the democratic process of the nation. He asserted that absence of reservations would lead to a systematic exclusion of marginalized and underprivileged communities from political involvement, and that is why you will find in the Constitution of India, Article 330 and 332. That was his endeavor to bring in. He faced lot of opposition if you go through the Constituent Assembly debates, but he succeeded. He succeeded because Ambedkar's mind is one of the greatest logical minds in history. And I'm not telling you without any proof. You just have the pages of the debates of the Constituent Assembly. He doesn't raise his voice. There is calmness in the words. When you read a speech, you can understand whether the man is angry, disturbed, or he's poised. He had a syllogistic pattern to convince people, and he did. Ambedkar considered economic empowerment as a fundamental prerequisite for achieving social justice. He argued that without addressing economic disparities through emancipation and empowerment of the marginalized communities would remain a distant image. For him, economic empowerment was not only a means of improving material conditions, but also a pathway to dismantling the hierarchical structure perpetuated by the existing system. He argued that economic independence was crucial for breaking the cycle of poverty and exploitation faced by certain communities. He visualized access to land, access to education and employment opportunity, so that there can be progression in economics as far as the underprivileged is concerned, and they get economically empowered. which our Shastras have said, unless a man have some artha, economics, prowess, he can't really grow in life. When the stomach burns, he can't create. That's what great Kalidas said. In a different way, Ambedkar puts it in the context that you have to empower the society which is economically suffering. That is why he suggests there has to be cooperative societies, not to have cottage industry alone, but so that there can be a collective pull. They can have access to wealth, and they can also have the power of obtaining the prowess of money to invest. He also recommended that the society must shift, not completely, from the agrarian measure to the industrial measure, so that they really become economically modern, and that is how he canvassed for industrialization. You see, Ambedkar was a man who thought of everything in a different way. He thought of distribution of lands, land reforms, measures, but he wanted that states should do it. And eventually, as all of you know, land reforms legislation came in various states, and eventually they have been upheld by the constitutional courts. Affirmation, as I understand, from the perspective of Dr. Ambedkar, was a policy designed to address, to remove systemic inequalities that has been reigning since centuries, and that is why he's put a new grammar of preferential treatment, and that is why it holds significance. He recognized the need for affirmative action to uplift the scheduled caste and other impecunious communities who have been subjected to discrimination, exclusion, and exploitation. He advocated, I quote, "The object of the fundamental rights is twofold. First, every citizen must be in a position to claim these rights. Secondly, they must be binding on the authority," unquote. If all cannot enjoy the fundamental rights, what's the purpose of having these fundamental rights? And if they're not binding on the authorities, their letters on the paper, sans any meaning, sans any truth, sans any possibility of realization. Ambedkar, in the original constitution, wanted to protect the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, wanted to empower the women. He always wanted, desired, from 1926 onwards, that the women should be educated. Because without education or bereft of education, they will ever remain backward. They can't compete. He always felt that the duty of the society to empower the women, and that is why education was peremptory as far as Dr. Ambedkar was concerned. It would not be out of place to state here that the constitutional scheme and ethos commands social sensitivity. One has to cultivate the said quality to have a seemly or appropriate constitutional vision of our compassionate constitutions. Without it, the idea of inclusiveness would be an anathema. I call the Constitution of India as a compassionate constitution. My young intellectuals, please remember, Ambedkar was not only a sensitive person, he was an extremely compassionate personality. That is why you get a compassionate constitution. The views of Dr. Ambedkar on human rights and dignity are rooted in the belief that every individual possesses inherent dignity being a human. I won't be wrong if I say Ambedkar believed I am a human. Anything that relates to a human concerns me. I care for their rights. I care for their dignity. According to him, it's all written. I'm not inferring anything. According to him, in a democracy, an individual enjoys certain inalienable rights. That is what one sees in the fundamental rights, which cannot be affected by any kind of majoritarianism. In a democracy, the government is by the majority, but the individual rights stand absolutely sacrosanct and sanguine, and that cannot be dented by any kind of majoritarian social philosophy or social guidance. That's what exactly said, and he meant it. Human rights, which is the thrust of Ambedkarian thought, is to accept the intrinsic worth of any person, the significance of equality and non-discrimination in upholding human dignity was highlighted by him. And accordingly, he worked towards establishing a legal framework that explicitly prohibited discrimination on the basis of caste, creed, gender, or religion. His vision was to ensure that every citizen enjoyed equal protection under the law, cultivating a society where dignity is universally respected. He carried on his crusade against the practice of untouchability, as he considered to be a gross right which ushered in perceptible inequality. The efforts culminated in Article 17 in the Constitution of India, which abolishes untouchability and makes it a punishable offense. And I must say, it has been a part of the Constitution so that the statutory laws can be made by the Parliament and the state legislatures. You are all young. Do you respect each other? I assume so, that you must be respecting each other. Ambedkar used to say, inclusion or inclusive society rests on the foundation of fraternity. He sensitized the society in a different way. He sensitively realized the inseparable nexus between the idea of fraternity, inclusiveness, and democracy. In that context, he articulated, and I quote, there should be varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. In other words, there should be social endosmosis. This is fraternity, which is only another name for democracy. Democracy is not merely a form of government. It's primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men, unquote. The purpose of sharing this thought of Dr. Ambedkar with you. All of us claim, I live in a great democracy. I live in a large democracy. I live in the largest democracy. Fine. But do you respect your fellow men? Do you respect your colleagues? Do you respect your classmates? I mean, these are the questions to be put and understood. Needless to state, Dr. Ambedkar was deeply inspired by the idea of fraternity in social, religious, civic, and economic matters. And according to him, when it is achieved, then inclusiveness becomes a norm and a way of life, and the conflict between competing individual interests really grow with liberty, equality, and the problem gets resolved. Ambedkar again spoke on fraternity. Why am I emphasizing on fraternity? That's a part, an inseparable part of social democracy, social justice, and it's a part of our preamble. Do never forget the preamble of the Constitution. Now let's see what Dr. Ambedkar says. Fraternity means a sense of common brotherhood of all Indians. It is the principle which gives unity and solidarity to social life. It's a difficult thing to achieve. But we must overcome all these difficulties if we wish to become a nation in reality. For fraternity can be a fact only when there is a nation. Without fraternity, equality and liberty will be no different than a coat of paint, nothing else. They lose their meaning. It's just a coat of paint. It has no sense. Look at the emphasis the gentleman had given during his time on social justice and fraternity. And do you think they are relevant? Irrelevant today? They are not relevant. They are still relevant. That is why I will say something later on, subject to discussion. To usher in inclusiveness and fraternity in the Indian society has been a challenging task, as recognized by Dr. Ambedkar and by all of us in present time. Undoubtedly, affirmative action by the body politic goes a long way in actualizing the solemn idea of inclusiveness. But for inclusiveness to become truly ingrained in the Indian society, our populace must also make endeavor. Believing in true intent can always bring the desired result. Unless we have the intention, we cannot achieve any result. That is what Ambedkar said. And today when I'm giving the third Ambedkar lecture, it's my duty to ingrain in your mind, heart, soul, that please realize this philosophy. You see, this inclusiveness, fraternity, as I told you once, Ambedkar said, it's at the root of democracy. Slightly surprising may look that democracy is a government by the people, for the people, all the people we have told, we have read. And why this man is putting fraternity is the root of democracy. He is speaking in the Indian context. My friends, please try to understand that. You see, in Subramaniam Swamy case, a two-judge bench said on fraternity, I quote, "Fraternity under the Constitution expects every citizen to respect the dignity of the other, Mutual respect is the fulcrum of fraternity that assures dignity. I think Mr. Srivastava talked about, and the Vice Chancellor also talked about it, the defamation case. The reputation versus the free speech. The court said, free speech is there. You have a right to dissent. You have a right to disagree. You have a right to criticize. But you don't have a right to create a dent in the other person's reputation, because that's an inseparable part of a right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. The same philosophy has been recently, 2023, so I call it recently, a constitution bench reiterates, and I quote, democracy being one of the basic features of our Constitution, it is implicit that in a rule by majority, there would be a sense of security and inclusiveness. Further, the preamble of the Constitution, which envisages inter alia fraternity, assures that the dignity of the individuals cannot be dented by means of unwarranted speech being made by the fellow citizens, including public functionaries. Ambedkar had said, go back to Dr. Ambedkar, please, I quote, self-respect is the most vital factor in life. Without this, man is a mere cipher. That's exactly the Supreme Court has said, a constitution bench. It matters to the person concerned. Dr. Ambedkar's legal endeavors to constitute the bedrock of constitutional commitment as the thrust of inclusiveness and equality are extremely significant. His manner of logical persuasion and active participation, as is seen from the Constituent Assembly debates, will remain an enduring legacy. As India continues to navigate the complexities of social justice, Ambedkar's legal contributions act as a laser beam, guiding the nation towards a more inclusive and egalitarian future, an egalitarian society, where individual is respected, words are molded for modern interpretation without creating any dent in the original thought and purpose. That is why initially I have said Dr. Ambedkar can never be dated. He is not a man of history, he is a man in present. That's the greatness in him. And why I am here? I am only here to make you aware of the thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar from a different kind of social perspective. We want our younger generation to become ideal citizens. And I am feeling extremely proud that I have the privilege to deliver this lecture, and extremely proud to talk to people. It's extremely pleasure for someone when he is able to talk to young minds. You know why? Young minds possess certain ingredients in their mind which can invent things, which can create different kind of philosophies. And great thinkers have said, never neglect the intellect of the young. And you are very courteous people, patient people, and I am obliged to Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for an insightful session and for illuminating the topic